I would also like to take the opportunity to say that SAIA, as well as the African Center for Energy and Policy, are both open platforms for the public to engage with our research. And we focus on major discussions in thematic areas. So we encourage our audience to look at our website, which is freely available to download. Just some basic house rules before we commence. We'll be having 4 speakers that will provide short presentations, and afterwards there'll be time for some discussion. So we do encourage our audience to pose questions in the chat that can be directed to our panelists. And also just a reminder that if you're not speaking, please be aware that you should mute your microphones. All right, before I introduce our 4 speakers, just our speakers, if I've left out any remarks related to your institutional affiliation, please just feel free to include anything that I may have missed. Our first speaker, I would like to welcome Marit Katal, who is the Interim Director for the African Union's Mineral Development Center. She's an experienced economist working on natural resources for economic transformation and sustainable development in Africa. Our second speaker is Jerry Ajabi, who is the Chief Minerals Officer at the African Development Bank's Natural Resources Center, and he will be speaking about the African Green Minerals Strategy. On our agenda, I would just like to let our audience be aware that Ben Bakawe was instructed to present, and he's the Executive Director for the African Center for Energy and Policy. But he will be replaced by his colleague, Mabel Akiwe, who is the Senior Policy Analyst and the Head of Monitoring and Evaluation at the African Center for Energy and Policy. And she will be speaking about green mineral opportunities in solar photovoltaic value chains. And our last speaker is Alex Benkenstein, who is the Program Head of the Governance of Africa's Resources Program at SAIA. And he'll be speaking about e-vehicles and Africa's green minerals. So thank you very much to our panelists, and I'll hand it over to Marit for the opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Simone. Thank you very much for SAIA and ASAP for inviting us to this very important theme on green minerals opportunities for Africa. Just the basics, I'm sure other colleagues will talk about it, but Africa is endowed with 30% of mineral deposits. And Africa's mineral wealth is and remains an important driver for structural transformation, as enshrined in the Agenda 2063 of the African Union, and also as reiterated in the principles of the Africa Mining Vision, which is centered around ensuring that there is optimal exploitation of mineral resources towards sustainable and growth and sustainable development in Africa. So as the world is transitioning to a decarbonized world, as you know, there is a need to ensure that the 1.5 degrees centigrade is upheld, then it is a big opportunity for Africa. If Africa seizes it, just remind us, what is the green transition and how would it impact the demand for green minerals, for which there is increasing demand given the need to produce renewable technologies such as wind turbines, electric vehicle, battery storage, and other components. So there is clearly a surge in the demand for green minerals that are required for these technologies. Just to focus on specifically on the green minerals or critical minerals, there are 5 main raw materials used in what we call the lithium-ion batteries, which is used for electric vehicles. There's cobalt, there's lithium, there's manganese, graphite, and nickel. All of them available in Africa. Also, there's also other materials such as copper, aluminum, and iron, also very relevant for the African continent. For instance, let's just take cobalt, for instance. In the DRC, produces 70% of the global demand, and it has 50% of its world reserve. The projected demand for cobalt is expected to increase by around 500% by 2050. The same for the demand of graphite, for instance. Like for graphite, we can find it in countries like Madagascar, Mozambique, and Tanzania. And we have also lithium, which can be found in Zimbabwe. Already, we can already see how there is a possibility for creating a regional value chain for this battery and strengthening the productive capabilities and expanding exports through the African continental free trade area. Already we see that coming. But now the issue is, are we really getting the best of our minerals? We have them. It's an asset to have raw materials, but what are the opportunities to capture this very lucrative market of electric vehicles, of batteries, of minerals? It is electric vehicles have they represent 7 trillion markets in 2030, and they can go up to 46 trillion by 2050, according to Bloomberg. So what is Africa doing? There is, according to Bloomberg again, the first stage of just raw materials, Africa will only be able to capture 11 billion of the market. If we add value and go up to the precursor, it can reach 271 billion already. But if you go up to the electric vehicles, we reach 7 trillion, etc. The good news is that a recent Bloomberg study, which was commissioned by the Economic Commission for Africa, the Africa Development Bank, Afrexim Bank, African Finance Corporation, and others, it really showed that DRC can leverage its cobalt and its hydroelectric power to become a cost and emissions competitive producer of cathode precursor. This is the added value of the third chain. And if it leverages other countries, it really you can have a plant, a precursor plant in DRC, and it makes cost and emissions purposes. It's not that, because otherwise it has to go to China and you add value and then it comes back, you have emissions, etc. But you can capture this market within Africa. So this is very good news for Africa to leverage on its regional value chains and it will create jobs, it will have multiplier effects, and of course, it will add value and really transform the economy like we want it, not just the raw materials part, but adding value. So what do we need to do? There has to be a strong political commitment from the government and political will, and have the right policies, because there is a rush for green minerals. So we really have to capture that part in having strong political will, strong policies towards value addition, local content, and the right policies. And the time is now. The world, the Teslas of this world are looking for alternatives to cobalt and to others because of all the, they want to diversify the demand. So they're trying to create. So the time is really now. We really need to focus now. And also, adding value and all this requires capacity. So we really need to ensure that we have the capacities in Africa. There is a good example of the Center of Excellence that is being created in Lubumbashi. It's underway. This kind of initiatives are very welcome. So you need the political commitment, the political will, the political policies, the peace, but also you need capacity and you need capital. Capital is also important because at the end of the day, even for juniors to explore and get the graphite out, you need capital. And this capital has to come from Africa. So we are really calling on junior explorers, junior entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, Africans, to really go into that. And for our African institutions to provide that capital, to leverage, know the value of our minerals and capitalize them and raise capitals for that. And of course, for all these, we need collaboration, partnerships, and all of us. So it's between C's and P's. I've seen political will, political commitment, policies, capacity, capital, and collaboration, partnership. And if you are all together, we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marit, for your insightful discussion. I quite enjoyed your last comment about the strong political commitment and will and the capacity and collaboration that is needed. All right, may I introduce Jerry as our next speaker? Please go ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Simone. I bring you greetings from Abidjan, from the African Development Bank. This is where our headquarters is. At the African Development Bank, we believe that natural resources, should be given a seminal role in Africa's development. And so, as part of our strategic development, we have what we've styled as the high fives, which involves, production of energy, light up and power Africa, feeding Africa, with our minerals, phosphate to fertilizer. In the lighting up, empowering Africa, we have these critical minerals, that are going to serve as battery manufacturing feedstock, and of course, being able to store energy. Then we have industrialized Africa, where all these minerals, that Marit talked about, will also help, in establishing, industries in Africa. Then we have integrating Africa, where minerals, plays significant, role. And at the end of the day, we want to improve the quality of life of the people of Africa. So indeed, minerals, serve as a cornerstone, and the energy transition brings about another huge opportunity. Marit mentioned about the two key battery chemistries. We have what we call the NMC and the LFP, and significantly, Africa has volumes of this mineral, so we'll not like to belabor that point. Now, recently, in addition to the DRC, why we went to the DRC, in addition to the cobalt, we know that the DRC recently, discovered the lithium deposit, 400 million metric tons, which is, one of the non-brine lithium deposits discovered in recent times. And that, will also catapult industrialization in Africa, using the DRC as a starting point. Yes, so I'm to talk about, green minerals strategy. So why a strategy when, we all agree that we have Africa mining vision, that provides a goal of transparent, optimal, and equitable exploitation of our mineral resources to underpin socio-economic growth and socio-economic development. And then why do we still need a strategy for this? The bank also recognizes that we have the recently approved Africa Commodities Strategy. The good thing about it is that the Africa Mining Vision anchors, all these strategies that we want to talk about. So the Africa Mining Vision provides, what we can term as the chapeau, but the details of maybe what critical minerals is and why the energy transition did not really come out. So we need, to develop some of these strategies, that can easily be implemented, to really ensure that we optimize the opportunities provided, by the energy transition. Marit has talked about the 8.8 trillion, but let me just state that the 8.8 trillion is up to 2025, and up to 2050, we are even talking about 46 trillion, of the market value, of these opportunities, in the value chain. So it is very important, that Africa really strategizes, to take advantage of these opportunities. But many rivers to cross, for Africa to go up that value chain. The investment environment needs to be improved, including, institution and governance issues, predictability of regulatory provisions. Currently, we have up to 2050, the demand for these key minerals that Africa has will be fivefold. It is 500%, cobalt, lithium, and the rest. But the rate of exploration, is not matching the rate of demand. So there needs to be a strategic move in order for Africa, to really increase the rate of mineral exploration to unearth more minerals. Per square kilometer, if you take exploration or knowledge of our minerals in Africa versus in Europe or Australia or in the US, Africa is hugely underexplored. So we need to work on that. Another challenge, river to cross, inadequate infrastructure, and all this inadequate access, to energy. And, but currently we know that China, leads in the value addition business of these critical minerals. In 2019, 72%, even now it's higher, of the refinery production took place in China, of this lithium, cobalt, and the rest, with the rest shared by Finland, 9%, Japan, 4%, Canada, 3%, and the rest of the world, just 12%. Another key challenge is the inadequate demand of EVs, on the African continent. We know that for EVs, annually Africa just, imports just about 1,000 vehicles. With most going to southern part of Africa. So how can we increase this demand, through automobile policies and the rest? We also know that there is no battery manufacturing plant in Africa. What it means is that value creation is lost, increased supply chain emissions. So how are we going to do this? There are a couple of battery assembling plants in South Africa, but the real end-to-end manufacturing, it's not there. So together with our partners, we said, yes, we need to do something about it. So that is where, we conceived the idea of the green minerals strategy, because if you will, the EU, the US, Canada, Australia, most of these countries and regional blocs, have strategies in any case. So what is Africa waiting for in order, to do its own strategy to be able to benefit? And also, to address the issue of sometimes, other countries bilaterally sourcing these minerals, from sovereign countries and to the detriment, of continental unity. So the bank and its partners, UNECA, Marit and Co are all involved. The Africa Union, UNDP, AFC, Afri-Exim Bank, and the rest, came together, to develop a concept note. Okay, currently we are developing an approach paper, which we will share with all stakeholders to get the orientation and the key thematic areas for the green minerals strategy. But some of the thematic areas that we are looking at currently is the need to improve the investment environment, strengthening institutions and policy and regulatory reforms. The other, as I've said, knowledge of the green mineral resources. We need to improve knowledge, of this, through mineral exploration, because if you don't know what you have, then how do you even plan, to optimize benefits, from it? We also need to foster, to scale up infrastructure, investments. Recently, when we went to the DRC, for that investment forum, the outcome, among others, is the need, to create special economic zones where, infrastructure will be improved, so that you really have global investors and regional and local investors, expressing interest to invest, in Africa. As well, creating of centers of excellence, will be one of the key pillars, and also not forgetting ESG issues, environment, social, and governance, issues in the value chain, because at the end of the day, we'll also need to recycle some of these batteries, and it comes with a lot of environmental issues as well. So let me just pause here, and I'm available to take questions. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Jerry. Really enjoyed your presentation and giving us a little bit more information about the green minerals strategy for South Africa and the potential that exists within the sector. I would like to move on to our next speaker, Mabel. The floor is yours. Please go ahead and welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Simone, and to everyone for having me. We all understand the Global Agency for Energy Transition, because the energy sector and the production of energy has been cited as the major culprit contributing to the emission of greenhouse gases. And electricity, and it's about 60% or so, about 60% of greenhouse gas emission coming from the production of energy. And when you drill it down, the production of heat and generation of electricity contributes about 32%. And this is mounting significant pressure on the fossil fuel endowed countries as well as businesses to either halt production or bring it to a minimum as part of efforts to save our planet, humanity, and other biodiversity. So over the past decades, there have been significant efforts by countries to increase or deepen their adoption of renewable energy technologies. And when you look at the data, you realize that there's been quite some successes, especially in the past decade. When you look at it, it looks like there's been over 100% adoption of renewable energy technology between 2010 and 2020, specifically from 1,226 gigawatts to about 2,799 gigawatts. That's it's about 8% annual growth. And this tells the agency that globally countries and businesses have put on diversifying their energy mix away from fossil fuels. And when you come to Africa, Africa is also doing a bit, although minimally. You realize that Africa's adoption of RETs has increased significantly or exponentially from 2,094 megawatt in 2010 to about 18,880 megawatt. Although compared to the global figures, is quite negligible, but you can also not overlook it comparing the figures over the past decade. And one other major issue, however, is that despite the great stride that Africa has made in terms of its adoption of renewable energy technologies, and one main issue is that we have many been consumers, as in Africa has been a market for the advanced world and other Asian and American countries who are more involved in innovation, research and development, adding value. And Africa is mainly involved in importation of RETs and installation and the service and other things. And we believe that it's time for Africa to view energy transition in a different sense, away from just increasing RET adoption and increasing the share of renewable energy in the national energy mix. We believe that as the transition heightens, we cannot be left behind, but we have to identify the opportunities, the various aspects within the value chain where we can also innovate and add value and serve ourselves first, and then also export to the rest of the world. And we believe that that is the only time that Africa can benefit economically and make profit from the energy transition. It should be seen as a business and not just as transitioning and being a recipient as we have always been. Otherwise, we will not be able to make the money in terms of the job creation that energy transition promises, in terms of significant revenue earnings that energy we can make by our economic participation along the value chain, because as the world moves away from fossil fuels, it means that along the value chain, there will be job losses for those engaged in the fossil fuel value chain, and there will be some revenues lost. So if we are to make sure that the energy transition do not make us impoverished or make us worse off, but as we join the Green Revolution, our lives are made better off, African countries are made better off, then we need to identify the inherent opportunities within the energy transition and participate accordingly. Because when you look at it, like I mentioned, the demand is increasing. And this is being propelled by, initially there were issues of the cost effectiveness of adopting RE technologies. And when you look at between 2010 and 2020, the efficiency of solar PVs have increased significantly from 14% to 24%, which is leading to major cost reduction, and therefore increasing the competitiveness of using solar PV to generate electricity compared to fossil fuel electricity generation. Similarly, storage technologies have also improved significantly, addressing the intermittency and the level of reliability of wind and solar powered or solar generated electricity. So when you look at it, for instance, the cost of lithium ions, which is the main raw material for the production of batteries, have reduced significantly between 1991 and 2018 by as much as 90%, which means that the issue of reliability, which has been a major concern for skeptics, is being addressed over time, and gradually the level of competitiveness for RETs compared to fossil fuel generated electricity will come very low. And when it happens like that, meaning the demand for RETs will continue to surge. The big question is that where will Africa stand when the issue of energy transition heightens? Because when you look at our RE adoption, you realize that mainly we are looking at solar PVs and wind. When you look at the value chain of solar PV, you realize that we are at the last end, which is just the assembling and installation, servicing and installation, which brings many, barely, not so much. But when you look at the entire value chain, about 5 stages, there are a lot of opportunities that Africa can take. We thank God for the operationalization of the AFTA. We can leverage on the tenets of the AFTA, the rules of origin, to work together, not just one country producing it from end to end, but through the tenets of the AFTA, having a collaborative effort and coordinating our resources, putting resources together to develop an integrated solar PV industry, such that we have the raw materials, we have the resources. Because when you look at the value chain, the solar PV value chain, you realize that the key resources or the key mineral is the silica sand, which is the quartz. And although there is not enough data to tell which country about the level of reserves by country, but the silica sand is known to be one of the most common mineral that anybody can find. And if it is the critical mineral along the value chain for solar PV, and you can find it almost everywhere, it means that we do not have an excuse to keep on importing the final product. Africa has as much of the silica sand just as the rest of the world. But when you look at the top 20 producers of quartz or silica, so you realize that it's only South Africa that feature in it. And this presents an opportunity for us to diversify our mineral production, not just depending on the traditional minerals, but as we are participating in the energy transition, we should also extend or expand our focus to cover the green minerals. And for the purpose of my delivery, I will talk about the silica quartz, the silica sand or the quartz. So if we have a number of countries that are well endowed in silica sand, then it means that Africa countries can now begin to explore and extract the silica sand here in Africa without necessarily going to buy the final product. And leveraging on the rules of origin, the silica sand, when extracted in one country, can be exported to another member state because it goes through a whole process. When you extract the silica sand, it's now transformed into polysilicon, and that one uses significant amount of power. So now the question is that which African country is able to provide power at a cheaper rate? Do they have the capacity to transform the silica sand into a polysilicon? If they don't, is there another country that they can export the power to that has the capacity to produce, to do that transformation? Because as I mentioned, under the rules of origin, because the silica sand, if it is extracted here in Africa by any member state, which is a signatory to AFTA, it means that that import or that raw material being imported will qualify under the preferential treatment under the rules of origin to enjoy relatively free trade and tariff and non-tariff cost. So at the end of the day, if we are passing this through the process, because our analysis also shows that about 80% along the value chain, we have about 5 stages, about 80% along the value chain qualify for the preferential treatment under the rules of origin. I think it's under just from the solar cells to assembling. That's the only part that does not qualify, because not a lot of value addition is made between the solar cells and the assembly. But that's 80%. That means that we can do that here in Africa and have it relatively cheaper if we are coordinating our efforts. And at the end of the day, it can compete very well. The final product can compete very well with those produced in Asia, those produced in Europe and the Americas. And it means that at the end of the day, we can feed ourselves, that's I mean with the RETs, and even export to the rest of the world. So I think the energy transition presents significant opportunities for Africa. When it comes to the critical minerals, I've already talked about silica sand. At the final stage where you need aluminium to finish with the assembly, to put it in proper state, Africa is about the leading continent with huge bauxite reserves. I think about 32% of the world reserves. So we do not have a reason to be importing aluminium from Asia, to be importing aluminium from Europe. We have the bauxite that can be converted to alumina, then aluminium, and be used internally, so that we do not have to be importing the final product. And this creates opportunity for job creation. This creates opportunity for more revenues. This creates opportunity for exports, foreign exchange, and all others. And this is the only way that we believe that we can make the most out of the energy transition while increasing our RE adoption. We are also making other fiscal gains and creating jobs and diversifying our economy. And this is when I would want to introduce the AMV. So the African Mining Vision has talked about the various aspects that we can optimize the gains from our mineral sector. And I believe that we do not want to wait for the rest of the world to take off, where we will still extract the green minerals and export it in its raw form. But if this is the time that it has become very critical to deepen efforts to contextualize the African Mining Vision, so that we'll be able to develop robust institutions, we'll be able to develop a well-built governance framework that will guide the management of green minerals for us to make more beyond the fiscal take, so that our Africa will not be one, suppliers of raw materials for the energy transition, and two, we will not be consumers of final product. Because currently that's the stage that we are now. We have the resources, we have the minerals that is required to produce the various components or RET technologies for the world. But we cannot continue to just extract the minerals, export it to the rest of the world, and then wait for them to go through the various processes and now take another money and even top up to import from the rest of the world. I believe that if we are well focused and if governments and local businesses work together, we'll be able to identify the various opportunities along the value chains. We need to invest in innovation. We need to invest in research. We need to invest in development. And these are issues that are well enshrined in the Africa Mining Vision. Investment in knowledge infrastructure, investment in human capital development, investment in institutional capacity to oversee the management of critical minerals, to build the capacity of individuals, and also create that enabling environment that will ensure the needed investment attraction domestically and from the foreign sources. Because this cannot be done by one country, as I mentioned, because it's cost intensive and also technical intensive. But with the right pillars in place, with the right policies in place by our government, and a well-coordinated effort among member states, then it's very needful that we'll be able to achieve this. And Okay, I would want to end it here. I can see Simone. So let me end it here, but I believe the time for Africa to act is now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mabel. Thank you very much for your presentations. Just in the interest of time, yeah, just had to wrap it up for you there. But we really appreciate your insights about the opportunities that are available within the energy transition for Africa. Just a reminder for our audience, as our speakers present, you're more than welcome to pose a question in the chat, and we'll get back to them later once our discussion has concluded. And I will invite Benjamin to speak next. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simone, and thank you for, Mary, Jerry, and Mabel for such a important issues raised. And I think listening, we are probably saying the same thing in different language, appreciating that, Africa has an opportunity at this point to also optimize the renewable energy space. We are probably getting late in the day because the technologies are already emerging from the rest of the world, and we are essentially consuming at this point. But our entry point really is the resources that we do have. And how do we optimize that space is quite critical. And I'm hearing political will, as Marit said, I'm hearing value addition, I'm hearing capacity building, I'm hearing capital to be able to do that. I'm hearing the need to gather data. Right? We need to know how much you have. We need to know the resource potential, not just by acknowledging it, but the volumes are also important. And how do we ultimately leverage all these capacities and resources to be able to achieve the ultimate of participating in the economics of the transition? And that is the critical thing. And I see that, as connecting this opportunity with action, because if you don't act, then you would always have the opportunity, but nothing happens. And that is perhaps the problem that we have on our continent, where we're doing a lot of the talking. We have the human capacity, we have the intellectual capacity. People can think through our resources and what we have. But when it comes to the political will to act, then it's a major problem. And I think for some of us, the time is now for us to have broader conversation about who is willing to at least cede some, sovereignty for the interest of the continent, because we seem to want to be powerful in our countries, and it's not working for us. And we need to now allow regional institutions to have some power of coordinating action for us to take advantage of the renewable space. The speed with which research is moving, the speed with which adoption is going, we need to stop wasting time and begin to act to take advantage of it. The private sector is investing over $80 billion every year in investment in energy. All right, we're not doing much in Africa. Governments around the world are investing around $50 billion a year in research and development. We are not researching, and we're hoping that something can happen in our context. And I'm afraid that is not going to happen. We need to get to work and make sure that we are also empowering our institutions to research. The world is still looking, even though we have the PVs, we have the wind energy and other forms of renewable energy. The world is still looking for the most efficient technology to be able to address the transition challenge. And it could be from Africa if we are researching. It could be from our context if we are putting money on the table for our institutions to do the thinking, as others are also doing. It may not even cost as much as it will cost, because labor is cheaper in our context. So governments have to commit to it, but immediately we have the resources to leverage on. And we have to do that without also forgetting that new forms of energy could come up through research. And if we focus on just one thing, and tomorrow is not wind, it's not solar, then we are left behind. So that is really what I want to act, that we have to link this opportunity with action, and a call for African leaders to really sacrifice some of their power for a coordinating unit. AMDC could be a central body for doing this. But if nobody wants to see power, there's little they can do. It's really the reality that if we still want to be powerful ceremonial presidents and ministers delivering speeches, nothing will happen. And that is the reality that our continent faces. And we need to get that, action happening within our context. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Benjamin, for your comments. I'm going to introduce our final speaker, Alex, and afterwards we will then have some time for questions and answers.
Thank you so much. And typical of being the final speaker, I think a lot of the good ground has been covered. I'll try not to repeat that, and it'll probably mean that my remarks will be fairly short. But I want to zero in specifically on e-vehicles and then make some broader remarks. And I would also say that my remarks are largely based on two reports that have been published by our institute recently. I have put the direct links in the chat. If you scroll up a bit, you'll find them there. Neither of those were authored by me, but of course, in my position as head of our natural resources and climate program, we're engaging with these issues on a continual basis. So firstly, just when we look at e-vehicles, we're definitely in the midst of a major transition, and we're seeing significant commitments from the major markets, China, EU, US, in terms of policy movements, policy goals. The EU has come out and said that by 2025, they want 1 million electric vehicle charging stations in the region. They want 30 million electric vehicle cars on the roads by 2030. China has said that by 2030, their automotive manufacturers should be producing at least 40% e-vehicles. So we're seeing these targets. I'm not going to even run through the corporate, but all the big automotive manufacturers, all the big brands have made very ambitious targets to 2025 to 2030 to 2035 in terms of how they want to bring e-vehicles. So this idea of e-vehicles being so associated with Tesla, those days are over. We're seeing all the big brands move in a big way into this space. And it's not just in terms of corporate strategies and government policies. It's not just words on paper. When we actually look at what's happening in the market right now, we're seeing that shift start to accelerate. So in the EU, e-vehicle sales in 2019, not that long ago, were under 2% of the market. 2021, they went up to 9%. Often some of this is from a low base. But we're seeing big moves. China e-vehicle penetration off on the market, 6% of the automotive market in 2020. In 1 year, 2021 went up to 13%. The US has been very interesting. Back in 2010, a few thousand electric vehicles sold. By 2018, that went up to over 300,000. 2019, again, over 300,000. 2020, over 300,000. 2021, jumped up to over 500,000. So just in 1 year, a big push. So on the ground, what we're seeing happening in the market, this transition is already happening. Automotive manufacturers have also said that they're going to be investing over the next 5 to 10 years, $500 billion in research and development, specifically related to e-vehicles. Some remarks have already been made about the mineral requirements and some of those key minerals. I think Marit mentioned them. So it's cobalt, it's lithium, it's nickel, manganese, graphite. These are the big minerals. We also know that in terms of these core minerals, e-vehicles are actually far more mineral intensive than your standard vehicles. So the demand is going to increase significantly. And it's also things like copper. Copper, about twice as much copper is used in an electric vehicle as is used in a standard vehicle. So what does this mean for the Africa region? And I think, we've obviously heard some remarks from the other speakers. There's 2 points to make. Number one, we know that beneficiation is not as easy as it may at first appear. Just because 50% or 60% or 70% of a critical mineral for a product is found in a country, it does not necessarily follow that that country can position itself as a competitive producer in the market. We've got to recognize that the beneficiation debate, it's been part of the African mining vision, which is now more than 10 years old. So this is not a new debate. So it's the first message I want to say is it's not easy. It's not going to be easy. The second message is we should not go to the other extreme and say that this is a pipe dream, that it's just not going to happen. There are things that can be done, but it takes very careful coordination and intervention and significant investment in order to make this happen. Of course, it's not just about producing a product, it's about producing it competitively. And we've heard already, and many of us are familiar with the statistics about the dominance and the economies of scale that China is able to achieve. They produce 80% of the world's lithium-ion batteries. They produce about half of the world's electric vehicles. So at those economies of scale, obviously you're finding massive efficiencies. As much as we can say, yes, it's inefficient for the minerals to go all the way from Africa to China, and then obviously the carbon issues around that, yes, those arguments are absolutely valid. But again, production at that scale does mean massive efficiencies. And then for new producers to enter that market and to compete effectively in that market, it's not impossible, but it's difficult. How are we going to move forward on this? I think we've got to be explicit about the fact that it is going to mean working more regionally within Africa. I mean, if you look at the SADC strategies, you look at some of the AU strategies, increasingly there's a recognition, an explicit mention that of developing regional value chains. But again, we shouldn't fool ourselves around how politically sensitive and complex this can be. If you take the e-vehicles example, South Africa has a relatively well-developed manufacturing, automotive manufacturing sector, very deep research, R&D base. Now, if we think in terms of regional value chains, I'm sure that our regional partners are not going to be happy if the argument is that cobalt from the DRC, lithium from Zimbabwe, graphite from Madagascar should be, instead of exported to China, should now be exported to South Africa, and South Africa will produce the batteries. I mean, we need to think through what regional value chains really mean in practice. It rolls off the tongue fairly easily, and the logic is there. Obviously, you're not going to have large-scale electric vehicle production in multiple countries in just the Southern African region alone. That's just not economically feasible. So at some level, we're going to have to work around regional value chains. But let's not fool ourselves about how complicated and how politically sensitive that can be. The other thing that's going to be required, and we heard Ben's emphasis on research, it's thinking through the kind of partnerships that are going to be required. South Africa has an interesting model. I mean, there are various initiatives across the continent, and many that we could look into. But in our report on e-vehicles, there's a specific mention of the Mandela Mining District, which is a collaboration between the Minerals Council, in other words, the mining business chamber, the Minerals Council of South Africa, private sector, and the Department of Science Innovation in South Africa. And it's all about trying to ensure that the mining sector engages in a kind of competitive, innovative manner, and that those linkages to industry and to value addition are made as far as possible. And we can see in terms of the research and financial resources and technical expertise that has been dedicated in South Africa, for example, in looking into hydrogen fuel cells and developing the hydrogen economy. Again, we're talking about significant investments to take that step from having the resource to being able to move up the value chain. And I think one of the challenges for us going forward is, and again, this is the debate that's come along in the Africa region, is to think very carefully about the carrots and sticks in terms of policy levers that we have available to us. Sometimes those sticks might be necessary, but obviously in terms of engaging and Africa's position in the global economy and in terms of international trade and all the rest, we do need to think through very carefully what those policy decisions may mean in terms of the internal investment environment, in terms of the international rules-based system. Again, to think through very carefully when we start to think about measures such as, for example, export controls. There's a lot that can be done on the carrot side of the equation in terms of creating an environment where that research and partnership is created to facilitate an environment where the innovation and where the product development happens. And then maybe just to reflect again, I think there were a few remarks about this from the other speakers, but just to step back for a moment and to say that, yes, largely this discussion around green minerals is around beneficiation and value addition and what those opportunities may be for the continent. But let's not forget, I think it was Jerry who made these remarks, let's not forget that the other side of the mining governance debate lies in responsible mining. So if you set the beneficiation debate aside for just a moment and about where these minerals are going to be exported to regionally or off to China or to other international markets, we must still continue the work of ensuring that mining is done responsibly. And when we say responsibly, we're talking about community impact, community benefit, we're talking about impact on the environment. So that debate around responsible mining, we cannot afford to lose focus on that debate as much as we try and move forward as best we can and as we should with trying to seek those beneficiation, those value addition opportunities. So I think those are my remarks for now. I see we have about half an hour left for Q&A. So at this stage, I think I'll hand over to Simone. If there's anything I've forgotten to say, I'll bring it into the question time. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Alex, and thank you to all our 5 speakers who presented today. We really appreciate all your insights that you provided with us today. I'm going to now open the floor to questions and answers. Let's start with Stephen Karaksi. His question is related to the potential of electric two-wheelers in Africa. With relatively low investment barriers in both end use and manufacture and rapidly growing two-wheeler fleet, could this sector be an important entry point for value addition in Africa? And I invite any of our speakers to comment.
Can I come in? Okay. Yeah, so I mean, I agree with Alex. Indeed, the 2 and 3 wheelers, Africa's low-hanging fruit. I mean, if you juxtapose the price of a 2-wheeler, I mean, a scooter or maybe a 3-wheeler, as against the price of, I mean, an EV passenger car, you see that for Africa, an EV passenger car, I mean, it's a tall order, you know, running into about 80,000 US dollars. Yes, but the 2 and 3 wheelers, you know, I mean, are quite low in price. And in Africa, we use, you know, this a lot. I mean, in our delivery systems and, you know, even as passenger fleet. If you go to countries, you know, like Nigeria, Ghana, Togo, I mean, the West Africa sub-region, and indeed Kenya, Rwanda, you see that there's 2 and 3 wheelers, you know, I mean, are actually used. And indeed, we have companies that have set up and are providing, you know, these services. They are actually manufacturing the 2 and 3 wheelers, even though some of the batteries, you know, are imported. But there are innovations as well, because I know countries like Ghana and Nigeria, some batteries have been recycled, you know, even from old laptops, and are being used in these 2 and 3 wheelers, you know. So for me, I would say yes. I mean, it's Africa's low hanging fruit, and we can really develop it, you know, into a very huge market. Thank you.
If I may, Simone, maybe something to add there. I absolutely agree with what Jerry has said. I had a quick look. Currently, 2-wheel market in South Africa, is a $2 billion market. So there's a lot of and anyone you know travels around the region knows that a lot of those 2-wheelers are imported currently, obviously. So that's one element to it. The other thing to think about is for the states also to kind of put their money where their mouth is when it comes to public procurement. So, if, you know, public transport system, bus rapid transport systems, these sorts of contracts that are managed through the state, is to really think through carefully and look for those opportunities where public procurement can be used as a spark or a lever to ignite some domestic demand.
Great, thank you, Alex. I'm going to pose a few questions and then invite the panelists to answer whichever question they feel most comfortable with. Another question was from Catherine, who asks, could the panelists comment on how African governments could learn the lessons of the last mining boom to avoid competing to offer tax breaks and regulatory concessions in the rush to attract critical mineral investments? What role should the regional organizations play in critical mineral governance? Another question from Kenny is how realistic and feasible are projections and forecasts relating to the benefit and meaningful spaces of green minerals?
If I may, Simone, as for the first question on how are African governments addressing the issue of competing with each other, and then how to use the regional commissions, the regional economic commissions. So that's a very good question. As was mentioned, the African Mining Vision was elaborated and approved by heads of states in 2009. And since then, there was a first phase of the Africa Minerals Development Center that was housed under ECA. And a lot of work was done with regards to this kinds of, how to make sure that, the Africa Mining Vision is tailored to the countries and to the regions. But we have to say that the focus was mainly how to domesticate the Africa Mining Vision for countries, the country mining visions. And to some extent, there was some good work done towards that, but there was an omission of the regional aspects of it. And that's a very good question that we always learn from the past. I mean, we have, there was a lot of work done towards the country mining vision, how to domesticate policies of the principles enshrined in the Africa mining vision there. And as part of those policies, there are some tax mineral regimes, taxation that took place, and making sure that they are harmonized, and we don't do the race to the bottom, trying to attract investments, putting tax incentives, tax breaks, etc. So there was a lot of work done on that side, but there was we admit that there was some omission on the regional side. So going forward, there is of course some initiatives done. The SADC, for instance, there is a harmonization of policies in the SADC region. The ECOWAS is also, there is also a harmonization policy within the ECOWAS region, but we cannot say the same for EAC, the Central ECAS, or even elsewhere. So as the new revamped AMDC, the Africa Minerals Development Center, we intend to really put focus on these regional value chains, these regional economic commissions, and how we can leverage. We can't do every country, so we should do by region and avoid this kinds of race to the bottom, and making sure that we are united. I know, as someone said, that we all have aspirations, and when you go to the ground, when you work with countries, what we say at the policy level, at the continental level, might not be as easy as it seems. There's a lot of pull and push factors, the global political economy, the rush, and then to get all these things done, and really need. So we have come a long way in the past 10 years, since 2012, 13 years since 2009, where we are getting into this African commitment. There is a lot of aspiration, not only aspiration, but embracing of this Africa mining vision and its principles at the core. But we should really focus on being united in our stand. And it's not easy. A lot of other influence are there, but we have to have governments that are, as I mentioned before, political will, context, and we have the numbers, so we really need to act. And I was hearing Alex say that sometimes it doesn't make bottom line, or it doesn't make cost advantage to have regional value chains within. But as was demonstrated by the Bloomberg study, there is costs and emissions advantage to having a precursor plant adding value in DRC for the precursor part, at least. The other side, I mean, to go to the battery, there's the assembly and others. It might not make sense right now because China is doing it better, like cost effectively. But and as mentioned by all others, if we have the capacity to do it and it does make the bottom line, it does make sense economically as well. So regional value chains are not just an aspiration; they can be done, and it needs really to be committed and to have the data, not so that it comes from aspiration to reality. Have the data, and then have investors. And that's also another question that I saw some. For now, I stop here, but we can really do it in action. Thank you.
Good. Let me just add on to where Mary stopped, because we were in the DRC together, where the study we did with Bloomberg, confirmed Africa's competitiveness starting from the DRC. And why that report was a success is because, the DRC, despite the fact that we normally hear, reports, about child labor, all the not pleasant things, but they are doing something right as well. It will interest, all of us to know that most of the mines, the mining companies in the DRC, Jika Mines, the state-owned company, has up to 50% shares in them. So it was easy to leverage that to do the analysis that, okay, now, so if the state is going to provide the feedstock, to the technology company that is going to produce the precursors, then at least, the consortium is not going to buy the mined cobalt, at a commercial rate, so these are some of the underpinnings. Now, also just to add on that Africa really needs to invest in exploration. I mean, if we look at the demand, up to 2050, if we have fivefold and supply is constrained, added to what we are experiencing now of the Ukraine crisis. And if Africa needs to step up, what it means is that governments need to put money in there into mineral exploration. If you know what you have, then of course you can plan and leverage, for that. I would just like to also add on that the train is already moving. And so we don't have the luxury of maybe wasting time, to say that, yes, always this rhetoric, Africa has a potential, but who eats potential? Nobody. So this is the time to convert that potential that we have into mineral-based industrialization and turning the natural capital into other forms of capital, i.e. infrastructure, education, and all that. These are the realities on the ground. But if we just continue with this rhetoric, potential, it's not going to take us anywhere. This is what Africa must do. And so this is why together, with our partners, we are talking about the strategy, because if you look at the EU and the rest, everybody has a strategy. So if you don't have a continental strategy, which, goes down into the regional one and then national, we are not going to get there. The lithium that has been found in Mali, to interest us to know that Gemfeng, has already about 50%, in that project. The one in Ghana, by the Australians, a US company, has already bought shares in it, and God knows if we'll be able to add value, to this. But the regional concept is important because Ghana, maybe, will not make the bottom line, if you want to produce even lithium precursors. But if we add that in Mali, which is about 108 million metric tons, maybe, it will make that economic sense. So regional mineral value chains are extremely important. We know in the SADC region, yes, we have the SADC RMV, which other regional blocks, should emulate. Thank you very much.
Yes, and maybe Simone, I would just add on, I think there was another leg on the concessions and incentives that, may have to be on the table for these investments to actually happen. I think what we need to do is to be clear on what strategy we want to adopt to exploit these resources. It shouldn't be a must-happen scenario for any mineral, for which reason we may just be giving out concessions and losing out as a continent. If the strategy is to ensure that we add value to the mineral resources based on whatever volume that can be optimized, then that should be the, the strategy that should seek to attract investment. So if the investment is not willing to add the value, you don't budge or change your strategy because you are eager to get quick revenue for the export of the raw mineral. And clarity on the rules is also very important. How do you attract the investment? How clear are your rules? How transparent are the rules to ensure that you go to the market for whoever wants to give you the value you want to come in? And that is where it gets very challenging when the politicians want to negotiate in the back door rather than being transparent to open up the resource base for those who can actually optimize and give you better value for it. So we need to get the data. And once we have the data, we should be open for bids from those who want to give us the best value for the exploitation of our resources, and perhaps align the value chain development with it. I mean, we keep talking about local content development, and I think we have to now realize that local content is not the same as patronage. You don't just align inefficient, politically connected people to a business and expect it to generate the value that you want. We have to have a capacity to identify local businesses that can be aligned and a strategy that really produce capacity locally. What we have been doing lately is really to use laws and power to force businesses to just select some few people in the name of local content. And capacity is not being developed in most part of our countries. So we need to have a strategy that gradually build that capacity, identify the local partners that can, in fact, be willing to learn and take up the challenge of participating in that space. But the most important, the rules have to be clear. They have to be, we should be able to trust the rules to operate fairly across a timeline to attract the decent investment that can actually add value.
Thank you. Mabel, please go ahead, and then Alex will follow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simone. I just wanted to add a bit to Marit's addressing that question on the regional organizations, the role of regional organizations. I believe that when it comes to Africa, we have considerable amount of laws and policies, and we have considerable amount of regional frameworks and guidelines that can guide us in terms of how we prudently manage our mineral resources, and by extension, in this case, our critical minerals. And the issue mainly has been the huge gap between these laws and our practice. So the AMV has been with us since 2009, but the question is, how many countries have fully domesticated it? And even those who have domesticated some tenets of it, how many of them are seriously enforcing those aspects that they have domesticated? So we have our critical minerals, yes. Starting from if we want to give it out for lack of the technical and financial capacity, if we are attracting foreign investment into our mineral extraction, the question is that do we even have the capacity to negotiate in such a way that we make the most out of through contract negotiation? And how many countries even are taking or adopting competitive bidding for our mineral resources? All these are clearly enshrined in the AMV. Do we even know the depth of our reserves? Do we even know how much of the lithium that we have? Do we know how much of cobalt that we have? Do we know how much of all these critical minerals we are talking about? Do African countries have the depth of the reserve they have, and how they can leverage on during contract negotiation? Because if you do not know exactly how much you have and the value of what you have, how do you have an efficient contract negotiation that goes to your advantage? And mainly because if we are also adopting mainly direct negotiation and you do not have this information, then obviously due to information asymmetry, where private multinationals have upper hand in terms of access to information, definitely you will be short-handed. So I believe that for the role of regional organizations, we have a well-harmonized regional framework. We have the action plan. We have the Africa governance framework, which is also a support to the AMV. I think the role that regional organizations can play is not just overseeing its implementation or its contextualization by individual countries, but do regional organizations have the requisite power to compel individual countries to adopt these regional frameworks that we churn out, that countries are party or signatory to. It's been over a decade. How many of the pillars of the AMV are being rigorously implemented in the various member states? And how are we efficiently, prudently managing our mineral resources? Because if we are not doing that, it means that the same way we are managing our traditional minerals will be meted to how we will manage our critical minerals. Is there any special institutional framework that is governing our critical minerals to ensure that we do not shortchange ourselves? So I believe that I am not well versed in terms of the authority or the powers of the AUC and even with the AMDC, but I believe that regional bodies need more power to compel countries, so that if countries are not doing what they have signed to or are not implementing their action plan based on the agreed action plans and governance framework, are there sanctions or are there specific support that these countries need to be able to adopt what has been agreed on and implement it based on the action plans and timelines? Thank you.
Should I jump in, Simone?
Go for it. Yes, Alex.
Right. So a few things I just want to kind of recap. The first thing is just to make sure that I was clearly understood. I am by no means a beneficiation skeptic. What I wanted to raise was some of the very real challenges. And I think this Bloomberg study, I put a link in the chat, is exactly an example of the kind of research and really detailed ground level work that needs to be done to understand the constraints and the opportunities. So firstly, just to kind of make clear that I wasn't misunderstood on that point. It's been touched on in some of the other remarks, but you know, we've got to recognize that China, EU, US, they're very explicit. It's right there in there. I mean, if you look at the EU's policies on critical minerals, and even in their Green Deal, they speak very explicitly that it's a strategic priority for them to ensure reliable supply of these critical minerals for their own industries. US has also been looking into this. China, I'm not too clued up on exactly what's written down in the policies, but you can certainly see in terms of the investment and the engagement activities on the continent that this is an explicit strategy. I mean, another kind of theme, I guess, that's been coming up in some of these responses is, of course, when we say something like Zimbabwe is the world's fourth or fifth largest lithium producer, or that 70% of the world's cobalt reserves are in the DRC, we must recognize that production that we're talking about is largely being driven by companies that have their own shareholder structures, and that they, whether they're from China or the US or the EU, or it's international. So we've really got to understand the picture of what we're talking about. And I think maybe an interesting role for the AMDC, if this doesn't yet exist, I don't think it does, is a kind of a green minerals observatory that could, I mean, there are some maps currently about where the reserves are and some of the companies are, but they're generally stationary. And I think this industry and the sector is moving so quickly that you do want a kind of interactive, continually updated observatory about where the big investments are being made, where new policy measures are being taken, things like the Hydrogen Society roadmap that's come out of South Africa, so that we can really get a kind of a play-by-play picture of how the sector is moving. I also want to, I see we're almost out of time. I want to jump the gun a little bit. I saw a few questions. A question about hydrogen and South Africa's role in the region, and even whether, given that reliable energy supply has been one of the main constraints for beneficiation so far, whether going into modular nuclear power is going to be part of the answer. I mean, to now have a discussion about nuclear versus wind and solar and others, I think that's a whole nother workshop. It does strike me that even if just look at South Africa's experience in terms of the speed at which new generation capacity can be implemented, that it does seem to me that wind and solar does have an advantage. And this kind of not in my backyard, the regulatory burdens and the time it takes really. But I'm cautious of now opening up a whole new debate about whether nuclear is a good idea or not. The other question was about hydrogen, and we ourselves have been working with the Department of Science and Innovation on a subcomponent of the Hydrogen Society roadmap. There's a big move in that. Part of that is also looking at what's happening on the continent, and we've seen just over the past few years a number of research, policy analysis, stakeholder mapping initiatives happening around hydrogen economy. So absolutely, I think there are big opportunities there, and we should be careful of just thinking in terms of the lithium-ion batteries and other components of the renewable energy sector. And then, given that current capacity and research depth, it does lie fairly strongly in South Africa, although of course by no means all. There's fantastic research and technical expertise outside of the country within the Africa region. But then what role can that play? Part of it is are those partnerships I was talking about, building on those research and policy partnerships, bringing across the lessons that have come out of things like the development process of the Hydrogen Society roadmap. And then, it's hard to say where those precise opportunities may be for actual investment in production within the region and partnerships in that respect. I think those things have to be taken by a case-by-case level, and you need to have a really good understanding of the market. But certainly I do think there are opportunities for South Africa to look beyond its own borders with a real partnership mindset in terms of ensuring that the region as a whole benefits. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Alex, and thank you to all of our speakers. Unfortunately, we are out of time, so I'm going to have to conclude the session. I cannot answer any more questions, but we do thank all of our participants for their engagement thus far. Before we wrap up, I would just like to mention that evaluation form has been posted in the chat, and we do encourage our audience to fill it out and provide any feedback for our webinar for today. And then again, just a reminder that to please have a look at SAI's website as well as the African Center for Energy and Policy's website. Our research is available to download for anyone that is interested. And yes, thank you very much again for our speakers and for our audience for taking the time to be here today. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Bye.
Bye, thank you.